Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion, which is for the exhibition project Hello Nehoma, which is currently on at Articulate Project Space in Sydney. And it's my pleasure to be here tonight with four artists in the exhibition: Locke, Tammy, Cyrus, and John. Tonight we're going to be speaking about and thinking about the theme of the panel, which is towards Hong Kong diaspora aesthetics, or aesthetics of the Hong Kong diaspora. Before getting started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you here today from the unceded and sovereign lands of the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as to welcome any First Nations people who might be here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that the exhibition itself is taking place on the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nations, and to pay my respects to elders from all of the Indigenous lands that our guests are zooming in here today from. So before jumping into our discussion, I'll just briefly introduce myself and our speakers and panelists here this evening. So my name is Genevieve. I am a curator and art historian currently based in Melbourne. I'm at the University of Melbourne doing my PhD, and my research looks at Hong Kong art of the early contemporary period, so 1970s and 80s, with a particular focus on performance art, video art, and installation art. And we are joined here today by Tammy Law, whose documentary photographic practice revolves around issues of migration, diaspora, and cultural difference. Informed by her experiences of being Asian Australian, Tammy's work explores the complexities of displacement and the emotional, psychological, and physical dislocations that occur. Since 2007, Tammy's work has been regularly exhibited across Australia and internationally. In 2018, she pursued further research in this field and completed her PhD in media and communication at RMIT. And last year, she was awarded a Queensland Artist Grant to publish her artist book, Cancelled and Removed, which will be launched later this year. Cyrus Tang was born in Hong Kong and moved to Australia in 2003. She studied visual art in Australia and started to practice as an artist after completing a Master in Fine Arts at Monash University. Cyrus's practice ranges from installation, video, sculpture, and photography to reflect sentiments of nostalgia through the translation of disappearance into remembrance and fantasy. Zhong Yang Zarung is a Hong Kong-born Australian visual artist. He has dedicated a 4-decade-long practice to the investigation of Western late and postmodern artistic practice from a bicultural perspective. Beginning his work within art criticism and a conceptual art practice, John has since exhibited extensively, both nationally and internationally, including representing Australia at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, as well as in large-scale touring exhibitions. He was central in establishing, in 1995, the Asian Australian Artists Association, which is now the Foray Centre for Contemporary Asian Art. And in 2020, John was conferred as a member of the Order of Australia in recognition of his substantial and ongoing contribution to the Australian visual arts. His forthcoming publication, John Young, The History Projects, will be published later this year by Powell Publications at the University of Sydney. And last but not least, we are joined by Locke, who is an emerging artist from Hong Kong. Locke came to Australia when she was 17, and despite living in another country and experiencing a different culture, the love that she has for her home and family is deeply expressed in her own art practice. In her early, sorry, just excuse me 1 second. I've lost the rest of your bio. In her early studies in contemporary art at the University of South Australia, Locke's works have served as an exploration of her ongoing struggles with mental illness, stemming from depression and anxiety, and how they form and alter her personal experiences with identity. Recently, her artistic practice has become heavily influenced by the current struggles faced by her homeland, and she hopes to speak out for Hong Kong while she still has a voice. So welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here this evening. So I'm hoping tonight we can speak to the theme of the panel discussion, and maybe in the first half of our conversation, I want to invite you all to speak a little bit about your works, the works that are in the exhibition, how you maybe on a personal level relate to this idea of diaspora or being in some way a part of or connected to a Hong Kong diaspora. Also acknowledging that I myself, and I'm sure many members of the audience who are viewing this discussion haven't actually been able to see the exhibition in person. So it would be great to, have a bit of a descriptive sense of your works and how they're sitting within the exhibition, and I will rely on you all for that. And then maybe in the second half of the conversation, we can move into a slightly denser conversation about the aesthetics of diaspora, what that might mean. I think it's really exciting that here tonight we have a kind of very diverse and intergenerational perspective with various kind of different types of connections to Hong Kong, whether that be people, kind of born in Hong Kong and moving only quite recently, or sort of having parents from Hong Kong, or these, a really range of perspectives that I think we can draw on to have a quite rich conversation. There'll be a bit of time for audience questions at the end, in the last 15 minutes or so of our discussion. So if you do have a question in the audience, I invite you to share that in comments on whatever kind of platform that you're on, and we'll kind of respond to those in the final section of the panel. So to start, I might just sort of go around and ask each of our panelists to speak to their work. Also thinking about specifically, perhaps there's a bit of a connective thread between all the works through the medium of photography. I think for most of you, that's not the it's one medium that you work in amongst many, but nevertheless, the works that are in this exhibition do sort of seem to have a connecting thread around photography. So maybe thinking about that a little bit as well. But maybe, Tammy, we can start with you. You've got a few works from a series of yours in the exhibition, and that are kind of suspended and hanging in this like fabrics. Maybe you can describe those a bit, and also maybe describe your own relationship to diaspora and where those works might fit into that.
Thanks so much, Genevieve, and thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you to the other panelists. It's really a privilege to be part of this. So I guess my works are digital images that have been printed onto fabric, and they kind of take place on the second level of the exhibition. So as you're walking up the stairs, you'll come across the first image of my mother reflecting on her father, her beloved father, and I guess that references our links and ties to Hong Kong and the greater diaspora and the greater kind of transnational relationship between Australia and Hong Kong. And then as you move through, the second piece is an image of I'm thinking of the second one is an image of my mother and father. Oh, sorry, no, the second piece is Double Happiness, apologies, which is the cover of a wedding album. And that's where all of the images of the 70s, kind of archival images of my family and my mother and father's wedding, kind of sat within. And this is kind of a book, that's been in the family for a long time, and kind of the images within that, I guess, that kind of journey coming here. Third image is titled Happily Divorced by my mother, and it's an image of my mother and father on their wedding day, or a portrait of them in their wedding attire, not necessarily on their wedding day, that's another story, with my mother's new signature, with her maiden name kind of imprinted across my father's face. That's kind of in a kind of gesture to her new identity coming here and leaving him. And the final image is all of these are also printed on the same material and suspended in the same way. The last image is an image of our front door on the Sunshine Coast, a bright red wooden front door in the middle of suburbia on the Sunshine Coast. So it kind of gives you a bit of a walkthrough of the imagery. The images are a part of an ongoing series that explore my mother's experiences as a migrant in particular, leaving her family, her friends, and that stable connection and relationships from Hong Kong to the kind of isolated suburbs of the Sunshine Coast in the 70s for the sake of love, which it is currently titled. And the work kind of, it looks at that importance of the family unit. Being Chinese, it's, the family unit versus the individual identities, and our kind of specific roles and interpersonal relationships within the family, rather than being defined by our own sense of self and who we are. So after my parents' divorce, my mother was kind of confronted with that task of, negotiating or renegotiating her identity through that transition, and the images kind of represent that kind of complex transition and distinction.
Do you want to briefly speak to perhaps what the combination of the photographs with the fabric does, or why you've kind of chosen to install them in that way or use that sort of materiality? Because it's also, the fabric is, from the images, it seems it's almost like a curtain, like it's like split up, and so
the images, like, I guess I kind of describe them as a fabric curtain. And they kind of reference, so they're cut or shredded into strips, vertical strips, and that kind of break the image, break the memory, and create this kind of reference to, the Chinese beaded curtains that you might have seen in, Chinese homes or restaurants, and kind of reference that breaking of tradition. There's a lot of layering there's a lot of layering within the journeys here, as well as the journeys within the new kind of country, in our generation, as well as my parents and previous. So I think that kind of layering is really difficult when, usually when using photographs and presenting it, on two-dimensional kind of, traditional two-dimensional paper forms. So I think the materiality of that object then becomes something of a kind of new imagination, a new imaginary, and kind of a new place for these stories to exist and for people to actually engage with as they walk through the space. And I do like the idea of people touching and walking through, and if you do get a chance to go and see the work, I don't mind you touching and holding and looking at the work from different places and spaces. So I think the intention there is for it to be tactile and held.
So much more kind of living memory of those photographs. Cyrus, I might turn to you now. Can you maybe speak briefly to your work in the exhibition, your video piece? Describe it for us, and maybe some of the ideas that went into that piece. Cyrus, can you hear?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't quite hear.
That's okay.
Because, the video is
Oh, it's
my turn. Okay. The video work, and so it's called I Wish. So the story is starting from a vision, the wishing tree, which is located in Tai Po, which is actually the wishing tree. Next to the wishing tree is my old house that I used to live, and before I left Hong Kong and then moved to Australia, and I lived in that house, and so for almost 10 years, and until my dad passed away. So I think it's that area is a little bit for me it's kind of quite sentimental, for the whole area. And then the symbolic meaning about the wishing tree is a kind of quite interesting. because when I was living in Hong Kong, and then every single year for the Chinese New Year, everyone will going to get a tourist bus and then go to that place, and then a lot of people, they throwing the Mandarin, holding a lot of stuff, and then everyone is thrown on that tree, and then to make a wish. It's a little bit like a Asian ritual. That is what we do, and then for the Chinese New Year. And so I make that word is 2019. They start the protest. And when the time they start the Hong Kong protest, and then I'm kind of quite excited in the meantime, and then I got a little bit worried. Yeah, I guess it's because we all witnessed about the 1989, the Tiananmen massacre, and then I'm a little bit worried about, how is it going to end for that whole movement? And then suddenly I'm thinking about, we all need hope. We all need to survive. And then suddenly I'm thinking about that wishing tree. Why people going every year and then to make a wish? Yeah, because we need that for survival. And then so that's why I start to think about, I'm going to make a video by using the wishing tree. And then I talked to my friends in Hong Kong. Can you do me a favor? Go to Taipo to help me to shoot a photo of the wishing tree. And then the funny story is starting from that wishing tree actually is rotten. It's being damaged because everyone is throwing Mandarin on the top, and then the tree is getting old and then cannot survive. And then the wishing tree was dead. And then the other funny thing is about the council, because they want to keep the dream coming, keep the people's hoping up, and then they make a fig tree in the same area. So, and then, God, it's a fig tree. And so it's plastic. And I'm talking to my friend, I don't care. Take me some images of that fig tree. And people still keep going, throwing tree on the fig tree. And and I found out the whole situation to me is kind of quite interesting. People, it's a ritual in the meantime, and then people need hope in order to survive. They don't care whether it's fake or not fake, and then they just keep going. And so, and then and then what I did for that video is I make everything fake, and then I make a model which is like a broken warehouse, and then I put that images like a fig tree into the model, and then it suddenly look realistic, but it's a little bit like a will in between will and unwill. And then I make the whole scenario is a little bit like because when the time I'm making the video, they start to having a lot of conflict in between the police and the students, and then they start to have a tear gas all the time, every single Sunday tear gas again. And then I decided, okay, you know what, I'm going to make some smoke into the whole model, and then to make it a little bit look very romantic. But in the meantime, and so it's a little bit like a metaphor about the whole situation. And so because the dream need to have a little bit like a romance to keep it going. But that romance is coming out, it can be quite trauma. And so that I think there is a lot of different layers of the symbolic meaning in that video. And then after I make the whole first footage, and then and then I'm watching quite a lot of documentary during that period of time, and then I decided to document about that period of time. And then so it's a 2-channel video, and then one is the wishing tree, and then another one is just simple documentary about what is happening for the protest. And so it will be like a 2-channel video.
Thanks. That was a really thorough description. There's something very also poetic there about the fact that the original tree was not able to stand or withstand the dreams or the wishes of everyone, that it's sort of like, almost collapsed or died under the weight of those kind of hopes and dreams. Thanks, Sarah. John, I might ask you to speak to your work, which is an older work of yours.
Wow, it's very moving what you both said about your works. I haven't seen that work of yours, Cyrus, actually. I
can give you a private view.
It would be a pleasure. Okay, I actually intended to put 3 works in the show. There were 2 paintings which are called 1967 Dispersion, and from that series. And I think those paintings, I haven't seen the catalog yet, but I think it appears in the catalog. But because of our limited means in exhibition, this is the situation with people from Hong Kong Diaspora, we're never really represented in Australia enough. So in terms of transport and everything, we couldn't transport those works here for show. But nonetheless, that first 2 paintings were depictions of another demonstration in Hong Kong in 1967. Which is a time way before you guys were born. But the thing is that that was the reason why I was sent out to Australia, was because of those violent times in Hong Kong. So you can have a look in the catalog to see, it's a combination of really documentary photographs of that time, as well as these sort of very abstract paintings underneath. And it sort of has this sort of contrast, which is very acute in the sense of this sort of neutral, sort of abstract paintings, almost like American abstract works, as opposed to the situation in Hong Kong in black and white documentary photographs of a lot of violence. But the actual work that is actually in the exhibition is called Manchurian Snow Walks, and I did that in 1979. My father, for some curious reason unknown to me, gave me a ticket to go to Manchuria, and I can't ask him why now because he's passed away, so I don't really know why. So I was still at art school at that point, and I sort of did this work, and I was walking around. Manchuria is very cold, and there was this forest with with snow in it, virgin snow, and just some trees. And I really felt, maybe this is the time to really think about my place in the world as coming from the Hong Kong diaspora, what it means culturally, And at that time in 1979, Hong Kong was really seen by the rest of the world as this sort of no man's land, no place. It was culturally, as far as from the outside world is concerned, particularly in contemporary art, as like a no place. We represented Hong Kong in any of the world meetings or anything like that. So I just basically picked a spot in the snow, in the forest, and felt this is like being in nowhere, and so I decided to walk from that spot towards another tree, and then took a photograph from that tree back to that spot, walk back to that spot, and then walk to another tree. So I did this, I think, something like about 12 times. But the more trees that I walked to and traveled to elsewhere, that spot became more and more significant and important. And I guess that now, in retrospect, I did that very intuitively. In retrospect, I really feel that that's almost like a metaphor of being in a diaspora where you feel that you're just nowhere. And then the more you go to other places, your own sense becomes more and more significant. So that's the reason why I put that work in, is something about a sort of a feeling about being in a diaspora, and a sense of loss of confidence, and a sense of not having any sense of agency about anything that you do. But now, the more you sort of engage on the outside, the more sort of, I guess, sort of feeling that you have the right to exist, you know. And so that's my work in the show.
Thanks, John. I think you sort of touched on or already in what you all have been describing, drawn out some of these things that are, I think, really interesting to you and specific perhaps to Hong Kong when we think about diaspora, which is these, I suppose, waves of historical inflection points that have prompted migration both to and from Hong Kong. So we've kind of, I suppose, mentioned the recent protests being very well known, but also Cyrus mentioned sort of 1989 and you're mentioning 1967. So this much longer history of diaspora and thinking about, I guess, John, with this earlier work, you're thinking through your identity in relation to Hong Kong and in relation to diaspora, or being part of diaspora was also in relation to, you know, mainland China, these kind of multiple, I suppose, sites or poles around which, you know, different people from Hong Kong or related to Hong Kong are kind of thinking through some of these ideas, which I think is very kind of, specific and interesting. So I think, for me, thinking about Hong Kong and diaspora, it's not just people leaving Hong Kong, but also coming to Hong Kong and the different generations and different reasons for that and different relationships to Hong Kong that has sort of created over time. And finally, I want to ask Locke, maybe you can speak to your works, which I think kind of quite contemporary, quite recent, dealing with some of the more recent historical events in Hong Kong.
So I put out two different work. So one of them is mainly collage, digital collage with my own film photography, and also some of the images that I found on books and some old photographs that I can find on Google. So Google Images is a great tool. And the other work is actually as one of my honor project, my honor work about broken pieces. So that piece is very heavy influenced by the egg and wall speech, which that's the whole egg is kind of made of wall material as well. So the photography work is called Playground Zero. So what I find doing the whole the protest, that experience is very surreal for me because I have to witness everything else from a far land, and I am the only family member in Hong Kong, in Adelaide, in Australia at that time, and it was not great. I'm pretty sure a lot of people feel very hopeless, and surely it's like it's very sad to see what's happening there. So the first two of the series, so one is they're actually two different sets. One set is basically about how history repeat, because I feel like the whole politics is pretty much a game, like a power game. So each series has a board game as a base. So the first one is the Chinese chess game. Second is the Monopoly. Third is the animal chess, okay. And the fourth one is the Feihan-K, which means the airplane game. So the first two is about history repeat, which I use both Hong Kong protest imagery and the Tiananmen Square imagery as well. So I kind of swapped two elements with each other because I felt like that's how it feels like. It's never going to end. And unfortunately, during my study, it feels like the revolution changes will still continue going, and there is no sight of end. So that's how I felt. So if you see a lot of details in there, I have put a lot of reference, which is very fun, but also very like hectic to put in there. But I'm glad the outcome. So the first one basically about not showing the face, which what I'm doing right now, because protecting your own identity is very important nowadays in Hong Kong, especially like you have to consider what you wear, what you do, where you go to eat. That's already one of the concerns of Hong Kong people, which not many other citizens would have a thought about it. But we have to do that extra step just to protect ourselves. And the second one is the monopoly, which is basically about the police doing that process, where there's a lot of people have went missing, and we were identified as object, which not many people appreciate that. And the most recent one, the third and the fourth, is basically about the people who chose to stay in Hong Kong and people who chose to leave. So I find only a lot of people who have stayed are basically our family or financial not available to move somewhere else where they have to choose to stay. I have met some friends who they love Hong Kong and that's why they stay, which is very brave of them. I have like deep respect for them. I was supposed to go back to Hong Kong in May, and due to the recent event, I was told not to go back. So that piece, that two pieces dedicated that experience of the whole, should I go or should I stay sort of experience. So the fourth one is, the third one in the little sign is that has the quote saying 留得青山在, which means while you're still in the green field, while you have hope, you should stay there. So we have hope in the future. So that's a lot of things a lot of people have said to me. And the fourth one is basically about leaving, but you're carrying a little piece of Hong Kong as well. So you see the little girl is holding the national flower, while the family photos is there's a woman holding the flowers. It's called the forget-me-not flower. So it's kind of like remind people, please don't forget the people you love and who chose to stay in Hong Kong. While for us who chose to leave, do not forget we are bringing a piece of Hong Kong to other places as well. So it's a whole, I wouldn't say a poetry in a sense, but it is how I felt as a daughter, as an artist, and of course as a Hong Konger as well.
Thanks, Luck. I think in having everyone describe their work, I think it has already given some insight into all of your relationships with Hong Kong and how you think about yourself in relation to Hong Kong and these ideas of kind of family connection and movement and those sorts of things. I want to turn now maybe to think more about diaspora in terms of aesthetics or your own art practice, or maybe in a broader sense, and ask the question, I suppose, of whether you find this idea of diaspora or Hong Kong diaspora to be productive for you in terms of your own art making or your own art practice. So I might start with you, John, because I know, several years ago now, you had a show called Diaspora Psyche, and I know that this is something you've thought about, that you kind of feel that this category of diaspora holds quite a lot of possibility for Australia and for kind of as a way of thinking through where Australia is going and things like that. Yeah, maybe you could speak to that a little bit. You're just on mute.
Thank you so much, everybody, for clarifying your works. And I think that just the four of us, the artists talking here, really expresses some very, very significant characteristics of what it means to be working with the idea of diaspora. For example, I felt Tammy talking about a family is very poignant because I think in diaspora, when you leave a place and you travel to other places, it's not so much the nation or the place that is gone. Well, what connects you is still the notion of the family. Particularly, I would say, sort of Chinese or Southeast Asian or Asian families, the notion of family in terms of the sort of Confucianist sort of ideas sort of is actually continued, within the diaspora wherever one goes. So that was very moving from a very attached sort of like emotional sort of like point of view. And of course, the sense of hope in both Cyrus and Locke's work, I really felt that that is one other thing, that you do actually normally leave a diaspora through some sort of like social trauma or some personal trauma, and a sense of hope to be able to regain that sense of life is such an important thing. But Locke also brought up a very interesting idea, which is that one of caution, that your autonomy is always threatened. And I think that is so interesting because, it's not just Hong Kong. I mean, it's Tibet, it's Xinjiang, it's almost Taiwan, that there is this whole problem at the moment, with the party and the CCP, and I really feel that this issue of gaining some sort of autonomy, and it's ironic because in Hong Kong, it's not like we're Tibetans or Xinjiang people where ethnically we're different. In Hong Kong, most people are from Han people, and technically, there's a absolute chauvinism of Han people in the rest of China. And somehow we have this sort of ambivalent relationship to that, because we can't claim the sort of power as mainland China has. We're always colonized either by the British or by mainland China. It's always sort of colonized, and in that sense, I find there is a question about autonomy of Hong Kong, and maybe like you would say that as Hong Kongers, but that we're not a nation in a sense. It's a name that people is given so that we can have some sort of autonomy. So what is there to keep in the diaspora for me is the values, not so much the identity, but the values that there is that we can carry. So that's how I see it, I guess. Does that answer to some degree?
Yeah, it answers your personal relationship. I wonder how you think of it, though, in terms of your art practice, and also specifically what role you think diaspora as a separate maybe identity category has to play in kind of the Australian cultural landscape, whether you think that is significant.
I think that it is exceptionally significant, and we're certainly not the first group of artists from that has the idea of diaspora, because after all, as I was saying, the Italians came in, and the Latvians, for example, Imants Tillers, started this idea of the word diaspora in the work of art in Australia for the first time, and that was actually taken from David Malouf, in fact, who's also Lebanese, right? So it's like the idea of diaspora is actually a very crucial thing within Australia's multiculturalism and the way how people come to Australia. The difference is, to me personally, I think it's a very, very important issue, but the difference is that how we become categorized as artists in Australia. If you subscribe to just like a normal Australian art world, then you're considered as an artist. And you're allowed to have a lot of philosophical musing. You're going to have a lot of theoretical musing about your work in relationship to modernism or modernity and things like that. But as soon as you claim that your work has something to do with diaspora, you're immediately slotted into just like a social sort of artist, very literal social artist. And you're sort of like in this other category. You're allowed to exhibit sometimes, but you're not really in the Australian sort of like role as a culture maker in a sense. You're just seen as somebody who's, we just have to let them in a little bit and have to give them their voice. And I find that to be the present situation a little bit.
Yeah, only able to occupy or represent so much Australianness, a limited kind of relationship to the idea of Australianness. I might if anyone feel free to also jump in if you have particular thoughts. I'm happy for this to be a kind of more of a conversation, but unless anyone has a particular response to that, maybe I'll turn to Tammy and you maybe can speak to this idea of diaspora specifically in relation to art and your art making, and whether you find that to be productive for you as a way of thinking about your own art practice. I'm also just going to jump off screen for 1 second and grab a computer charger. But Tammy, maybe start speaking now. Yeah.
Thanks for that segue, Genevieve. I think like everything that everyone is saying, it makes so much sense to me. I think the idea of diaspora in my own work is heavily embedded. Like exploring what I explore in my work is those dualities that exist when you live within a place that I was born in Australia, so I have a different a different kind of relationship with the idea of diaspora in terms of, the relationships Cyrus or John or a lot might have. But I think that the Asian Australianness that I live within, this kind of bubble, that I live within, that acts as a catalyst for what I interrogate. And looking at those dualities between, freedom and dislocation, or identity and assimilation, or loneliness and belonging, in relation to the idea of home or who we are. I think that's always what I'm looking at, and what my work is kind of deeply and constantly negotiating. So I think, the idea of diaspora is very much embedded in everything that I make, or everything that I produce or think about, and in my daily kind of life. John speaks of the values that are held within diaspora, and I think those are very much, even in the way that I interact with my friends, who may have been born from overseas, who may have been born here. There are those, I guess, differences and commonalities that allow us to feel like we belong within the space here, but also, don't allow us to feel like we belong. So I think every little, not just the way we create art, but every little moment, everything that we do is informed by diaspora.
Yeah, it seems like it provides quite a productive tension for you, those sorts of, or maybe a movement, that back and forth, between belonging, unbelonging, all those kind of, tensions that you just described. Yeah. Locke or Cyrus, did you have a particular response to that? Do you want to jump in, Locke, about whether you find diaspora to be productive for you as a
yes. Okay. Yeah. And so I never really think about the diaspora, that kind of questions. And then when the time I moved to Australia, because for me, I think it's because the nice thing is we always carry 2 passports. And then when the time I moved to Australia, and then I just keep on thinking about, I just want to study and then finish the study, and then I just go back Hong Kong, and I can always go back to Hong Kong anytime I like, because I have a dual citizenship. Not many countries they will have a dual citizenship, and then not like Malaysia. And so and we got a dual citizenship, and we always find it out. I got a backup plan. This is how I feel it. And I guess it's in the last few years, and then I feel like, do I still got that kind of backup plan? And and then I start to think about these questions. And so if and when the time I go back to Hong Kong, and I don't even have a bed to sleep, just sleeping on the couch, and which is is it really like my backup plan? And I start to think about these questions, and and I start to okay, and actually I don't have home, and then I start to think about okay, what is my relationship with this land? And I do agree with everyone. Actually, we are a little bit like in between. I guess especially I'm an immigrant and I moved to Australia when I'm already an adult, and so my home. I was thinking I'm very Western until I moved to Australia, and I found out actually I'm very, very Asian. And so, and so like and so I'm very Hong Kong, and in terms of thinking and or food or and so and I always find it out is that kind of in between, and it's become more and more obvious. And so I might live in Australia, and it and it will be difficult for me to claim myself. I'm a really like Australian. I like Vegemite, and then and so but when the time I go back to Hong Kong, and then it never be the same. It doesn't feel like you belong there anymore. So this is how I see it. And so because my home is gone, and my house in Taipo doesn't exist anymore, and families move on, and so it doesn't like you belongs to anywhere, and then suddenly, and so you just sit in the middle. I think that is the part of the reason why I start to join into that kind of psychological space, and then that psychological space, and then suddenly it's become my home.
And do you find that it feeds into your art practice?
I guess that is also part of the reason why I start to join into the memory and go back into the past, and or how to frozen all this memory, and so and then that kind of psychological space, and then it's become like my home, because home is like a very vague term. There is no physicality about home, and actually it can be like a psychological term. And so I think it's all depending on how you describe as a home. For me, it's a little bit like a psychological term. It's not like a physical space of Hong Kong anymore. It's a little bit like my psychological sense of Hong Kong. So that's why, and then I turn into a little bit like a nostalgia. Keep on thinking about all this kind of fusion breakfast, and mixed with the jam toast with condensed milk. That kind of strange. Which is not many people they will associate. It's just like it's just like if you grow up in that country city, and then you will associate with that kind of strange that kind of style.
I think that's interesting though, the way that you're saying, speaking to how your kind of subjectivity or your sense of self changes depending on where you are. It's a sort of like relative sense of self, depending on your location, and also the way that your relationship to home is so dependent on very specific things, like in Hong Kong, I guess, urban construction or urban renewal, where your physical home doesn't exist anymore, like those sorts of changes and how they impact memory and connection and things like that. Did you have any thoughts on this question?
I actually find compared to others, I in a way I'm very glad to, of course, sharing the creative space with you all. But what you're saying about having dual passport, as someone like myself, who only have Hong Kong passport, I'm not a citizen yet, nor even a permanent residency. It has been a very difficult space for me to create often, because I'm not a citizen, and it can be hard for me to find a studio space or even to grant. But I think that's also where my art comes from. in this past couple of years has a lot of my artwork motive is starting from love to fear to anger or frustration or just upset, because there are so little things that I can do, especially for instance, my passport may be like expired in a couple of years if I haven't got to a citizenship then, and how like I would literally be a no man's land kind of a thing. So for me it is scary. So in a way I think I'm a little bit jealous I guess, because like at least have a home while my family is still in Hong Kong, unfortunately, and I think in a lot of times I do regret that the last time I ever visit Hong Kong was 2019 in January, like the summer holidays period of time. I regret that I didn't know it was the last time I ever visit. I think that is the most tragic thing I've ever experienced. I wish I charged my time more, but I think having here, you cannot always just be in the fear part. You also kind of like, okay, I cannot go back, but what I can do for people who doesn't have a voice in Hong Kong right now. So I think what we are trying to do here as well is trying to remember every single detail, like the fig tree to the mother's story, or even just a simple landscape. I think that is just how we try to remember the place that we love and grabbing the hope that the Hong Kong that we used to know will one day will be restored. Who knows will take how long, but at least that is something I really want to like present, deliver in the work. It's the foundation of the egg as well. That's in the egg I actually said, 我真係好撚鍾意香港, which means I just so fucking love Hong Kong. I don't know should I swear, but I just so effing love Hong Kong. And I think, yeah, just remember the foundation of why we create in art as an artist, I guess.
Yeah, so for you there is also this much more maybe immediate emotions, quite a large range of emotions really feeding into your work and into your connection to Hong Kong. A very like directness and sense of immediacy there. We're going to turn now to some audience questions in the time that we have remaining, and see what the audience might have to say, which they might understand that they should come in through the chat. So maybe I'll just give that a couple of seconds to see if we have any questions. Oh, in the comments. Oh, great. Okay, sorry, there's quite a few questions, so I'll just have a quick look. And I think everyone, all of our panelists, the questions from the audience are just in the comment section. So feel free to have a look at those, and if there's anything that you think speaks to you sort of directly.
Wow. There's a lot.
That's why I responded that way. Okay, so I might just start with the first question, which is to everyone. I don't know if we'll have time to kind of, I guess, operating with a limited time, so I don't know if we'll get everyone to respond in full, but maybe if you feel that you have a kind of immediate answer to this question or it speaks to you, you can jump in. What message or emotion are you trying to convey through your art, and how do you hope that your audience will react to or respond to your work? Does anyone have a immediate? I mean, maybe is that what you're thinking about in creating the work? So I think it's quite interesting and unique for the theme of this exhibition, for it to be Hong Kong diaspora. You know, as John said, it's very unusual in Australia. And you know, do you have a hope for what audiences might take away from your work, from the whole exhibition? Maybe if anyone wants to jump in there.
I think personally it's to without sort of undercutting Locke's idea of, you know, like there are very traumatic situations right now, but however I really feel that, you know, there's always been people in the diaspora, you know, like people coming from Lebanon would have similar stories of loss and feeling this sort of emptiness. However, personally, if we're talking about diaspora, Hong Kong diaspora aesthetics or something, you know, when I left Hong Kong in those days, in the 70s, you only have a sort of ID card, and you actually given a C-class British passport. Not like a real British passport. It's like a C-class British passport, meaning that you're part of a colony of that place. So immediately, one sense of identity is not one of belonging to Great Britain or whatever it is. You are a C-class citizen automatically, you know. And in that sense, I never felt that Hong Kong was fundamentally a sense of nationhood or something that you can belong to. It's more like all this sort of beautiful experiences, sensorial experiences, like what you were talking about, you know, like the milk on the toast and this and that you really grew up with, that creates Hong Kong. Because I mean, I've had several friends that were actually significant Chinese artists, for example, you know, like Xu Bing and Cai Chang and people like that. They could always claim Chineseness. They could always claim, you know, I'm a Chinese artist, so I can use text, I can use calligraphy, you know, because that is important for a Chinese artist. Or, you know, Cai Chang would say, I use gunpowder because Chinese invented gunpowder. You can't say that in Hong Kong. We're not even allowed to claim a sense of ethnic, you know, like sense. You know, we were so colonized from the start. But at the same time as colonized at the start, we're not abject because we're actually so cosmopolitan as well. It's a very cosmopolitan city where so many different signs and interests and economies cross over. So people can see that it's ever changing. So I think that it's a very, very interesting diaspora in that sense. That we're not from a diaspora like Latvia or somewhere where it was a country and it was taken away from us, or we had to leave it. It's more like just all these sort of wonderful emotional and sensorial sort of like sense of what we call home is what we left, you know. And maybe you can actually bring some of that along. But you know, it's also the idea of that to me. It's not so much a sense of nationhood or something like that from other diasporas.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, definitely. Almost less of a burden, maybe in some ways, being able to not have to deal with these sort of national identifiers or these sense of a nation or nationhood. Yeah. Did anyone else have a thought about that or a response around maybe a particular message or emotion that you're wanting audiences to come away from, either from your work or from the exhibition more broadly?
Yeah, I totally agree with John. I think it's because Hong Kong is being colonized for such a long time, and then coming out that kind of mixture in between the East and the West, and so it's become turned into like a unique, strange culture, and then it turned we tend to stuck together, and then only we can share that kind of uniqueness. Like when we swear in a very unique way, and only all the Hong Konger we can share about that kind of strangeness. And so and then like in the afternoon, I just share with someone else, like at home, and then we burn paper money, and then to in all the May festival, and then and then we have home to the ancestor, and then we have like bao gong, something like that at home. And but during the daytime, and then we do Jesus, and then we have Holy Mary in the school. This is our culture. That kind of strangers. There's this combination together, and so and then we have God everywhere, and it doesn't matter. So and this is our culture, and so and then make it so unique and make it join together, and make us miss so much.
Yeah. Any other
I think
thoughts?
that's what makes sort of Hong Kong films interesting too.
Yes.
You know, like I mean, Wongoa and things like that. It's like so much of your emotions are derived from elsewhere, from Shanghai or something like that, isn't it? But it comes into this conjunction in Hong Kong, and it becomes unique. And you know, but there's a sort of to me, there's also a sort of sense of melancholy to that. You know, like that it's sort of you're in this existence, but you can't quite identify quite often the roots of that, you know, of the value or the things that you're doing, because it comes from so many different directions, and things change so quickly.
Tammy or Locke, did you have any thoughts on that question about a particular message, emotion, something you want people to walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we're still here. We're still surviving in a way, but we're still here. And I think regardless of like just Hong Kong, I think a lot of countries nowadays is facing similar crisis, like Ukraine and other similar countries that they're facing literal war. We are just one of the fortunate in such an unfortunate situation where we can still have very limited freedom to choose to stay or leave. I think that's one of it. But I think whatever we're facing as a Hong Kong people, but I think we still want to tell the world that like I understand, and I hope you also understand where I'm coming from, or our struggle as well, because it is so important to remember the challenges we're facing, and you know, I think that's just how I feel in terms of like wanting the audience to remember.
Yeah, Hong Kong being a small place, but obviously lots of possibility for solidarity with other, as you say, kind of struggles, but also other diasporas. There's lots of resonances there. Yeah, for sure. We are kind of slightly over time. I might ask, I guess, one final question, which again, anyone feel free to jump in, but just Peter has asked if being outside of Hong Kong, whether that, like being in Australia, whether that has offered a different perspective on your art creation. So I think we've spoken a lot about the connection to Hong Kong, perhaps, as well as this sense of movement back and forth. But perhaps if anyone has any reflections on whether being in Australia, being Hong Kong, in Australia or outside of Hong Kong, whether that's changed or shaped your perspectives.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, well, since I came here when I was 17, I was practically still a child in some way. But I think because I left such a young age, then I realized how much I didn't know about my home. And I did more research as I being away. And for some reason, because I'm away, I'm more closer to home than I was. Like, at least I have more appreciation. But again, I was only a child. But now I'm as an adult, I definitely like, I'm aware more about the situation. I'm aware about the world. Hence, doing my own research while hearing stories from others, from fellow artists, or even friends from home, that yes, it definitely gives a different perspective. And as someone who's living a little bit more, have a little bit more freedom to create, I think that will also give us a little balls to make more artwork that is definitely more upfront in a way that we feel definitely it is very straightforward, but it's necessary to speak up. I think that's the perspective I'm getting from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Locke. Did anyone else want to jump in?
My feeling is that it's a question of the difference between us from Hong Kong, the Hong Kong diaspora, or other diasporas, people in Australia. You have other Australian artists who were totally born here and have no questions about being from Australia. And they have this incredible sense of entitlement to be able to make art and to support their position, particularly men, actually. This sort of entitlement is not given necessarily to people in the diaspora generally. And somehow, we've got to find our own way to actually feel that you're entitled to actually do the artwork, other than just expressing what you feel. It's about being entitled to say something and to put certain values that is important to you in Australia, in the Australian culture. And I think that this is one issue, one big difference that I felt, after leaving Hong Kong. My sense of entitlement has changed, and I somehow have to not exactly fight for it, because you also have to learn how to do it as well. You have to learn in a sophisticated way how to have regain that sense of entitlement, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Hong Kong has also, thinking about it as a productive liminal space, this sort of culture that is able, outside of, as you said, sort of national cultures of China, but able to sort of productively intervene in ideas of, in this case, Australian culture, but the capacity to look maybe from an outsider perspective and shed new light on, what we might think of as, an Australian culture, or people who feel entitled to create that culture, and that it's important, for people from this diaspora, but more broadly, who are not kind of yet from Australia, or still what we think of as this Australian identity, feel entitled also to speak frankly and honestly, and frankly, kind of make those artistic and cultural contributions, to what we think of as being Australia and Australianness. We are kind of almost 10 minutes over. I think in summarizing this conversation, I guess I want to maybe return to the theme of the panel, which was around an aesthetics of the Hong Kong diaspora, how we might start to think about, an aesthetics of diaspora in relation to Hong Kong specifically, which I think is a really challenging and broad idea. But I guess maybe summarizing some of the threads that have come up in this conversation, and I think in lots of ways we sort of answered or started answering that question in a maybe quite expansive or roundabout way. But I think these consistent ideas of sort of memory, and in some ways nostalgia, but memory being a really strong thread there, but I suppose for many of you in a living way, kind of like tactile living memory, something that's not stuck or stagnant or not always necessarily nostalgic, but is able to have, I suppose, like new life in Australia. In terms of Hong Kong specifically, we've been talking about markers of home or identity or Hong Kongness that are not tied to national signifiers, national senses of identity, this big, big idea of country or nation, but are more to do with ritual and family and tactile and to do with, you know, food and senses, and this sort of like that can be a real where that connection comes from, that are quite personal, idiosyncratic, and a sensorial. There's like a tactility there that is what can be lost or maybe tried to be recreated here, and that there's also often this a sense of insiderness, the specificity of Hong Kong, its uniqueness in being able to take from lots of places and sort of repossess, appropriate things and make them into something that is Hong Kongness, and reimagine them, and that speaking to Hong Kongers specifically, as Cyrus said, kind of with language or these things that only Hong Kongers will be able to recognize. And I think that is often a big thing that Hong Kong artists have used, like ways of using Cantonese and local idiom and local vernacular just to speak directly to Hong Kongers, this kind of how to build community, with these, I suppose, specific cultural practices and cultural traditions and things like that. I guess those are some of the bigger things that I think came through for me in thinking about what you all have said and your different works and different practices, as well as for you, Locke, you know, a stronger sense of emotion and emotional immediacy. I guess those things that fluctuate depending on what is happening in your homeland. But maybe the diaspora, its aesthetics is not fixed. It's also tied to where you are from. So that's kind of the aesthetics of the diaspora might, you know, fluctuate in relation to what's happening there, and the immediacy of that for you or for different people. Anyway.
Can I just say something? I also want to say that it's fabulous. It's happening. Hong Kong diaspora artists is actually happening, because I really think that Genevieve is not very good in advertising herself. You need to talk a little bit about the rating of your video exhibition at the University of Melbourne. It's the first time ever that's ever been done.
Oh, thanks, John. That's very kind of you. It actually closes on Friday, my exhibition, so there's not very much time to go. But yes, there's a show of video art from Hong Kong as well as Taiwan and China, but some great early video, which is kind of related to my research at Melbourne Uni. But I can get maybe I can get Rachel to share that through your channels. Which has been a real privilege to work on. And it is really exciting. I think that is something, I suppose, that's exciting, as well as to see the visibility of community, which I guess is what this exhibition is trying to do. I mean,
it's not just an exhibition, it's a whole historic, research from when?
Research driven from, I suppose from the start of video. So from the 80s through to kind of very contemporary.
Contemporary. And it's called After Image, isn't it?
Called After Image, new media art in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. But I think that, that exhibition, this exhibition in particular, making visible the Hong Kong community, the diversity of it, the different perspectives it holds, like the possibility of an aesthetics of diaspora, is really exciting, and is a really first, important step, is just kind of bringing all those things into one space and making that kind of visible, and bringing works into dialogue with each other, and them, being able to speak to each other and being able to see what a Hong Kong diaspora aesthetics might be. I'll start kind of thinking through some of those questions. So I'll leave it there. We've gone over, but I think it's a really rich area for conversation, and thank you all for your very generous responses and speaking in detail about your works. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks to everyone who joined us online and for your very active participation through the comment section and asking questions. It's always really great to have an active audience in these sorts of situations. And thank you very much to Rachel and Pamela for inviting me to moderate and kind of for co-curating this wonderful exhibition. So if you have a chance and haven't been yet and you're in Sydney, please do go. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.